So let me do that. Cool. Okay. So the title of this really over bombastic digital filmmaking aesthetic crisis, which I'm being serious about, but anytime someone titles a presentation as something crisis, it's always really silly. Maybe what I'm trying to do with this to start off is like when I was like a student at Northwestern and doing like cinematography stuff, I kept getting this feeling as I like learned more about it of just like, oh, is this it? Is that it? And also just in regards to filmmaking in general, I just started to feel very, very jaded and annoyed, embittered even. So what partly I'm trying to do is make what kind of appears really dead more alive, or what's like uninteresting is interesting, maybe. The original motivation of this was I wrote this like silly independent study like my senior year, and the kind of launch point of it is like, oh, okay, with there seems to be kind of like these essences to particular like film emulsions. I wonder if that's true for digital camera sensors as well. So I was going to do these experiments where I was going to take like digital cinema cameras and shoot them without lenses in dark closets and turn the ISO up and see what happened. But then Corona happened, so that didn't happen. But I wrote this research paper instead regarding it. But it's really useless to write a research paper and not do anything with it other than just like publish it. And a lot of the stuff I wrote in it regarding like cinema and shit was stuff I kind of wish I wrote it and was like, well, yeah, this feels obvious, but it was like stuff I kind of wish was just like told to me when I was like a freshman or sophomore, because I feel like it would have been useful then. So I was like, this would be useful to do as like a teach-in, and also I have nothing to do. So that's what this kind of came from. Um, original, maybe something underlying this that is kind of a problem as well is like, actually, I'm not even gonna say that. Maybe I'll say it at the end. But I'm gonna like show you guys 3 things to frame this, and then I'm gonna focus it more. So can you guys see if am I on Facebook for you guys right now?
Yeah.
Cool. So a couple of years ago, my friend Asher added me to this Facebook group called UNT Short Film Club. And over the past couple of years, I've been like, he goes to the school, University of North Texas. And the past couple of years, I've been lying dormant and adding more and more of my friends. I've been building a secret army in this Facebook group. So, and then December, I made this post because I thought it was funny, but it elicited a lot more of a response than I thought it would. And also my secret army was like influencing the poll and people got really angry. But there was some really interesting conversations that sprung up partly, and I was like acting like the dumbest person alive, which is useful a lot of the times to act like the stupidest person alive. This guy replied like Tony Vita. He was like, I like make this post and it's like, film's a little passe. I think we should modernize this group. Vote to change the organization name to the UNT Content Creation Club. So this dude who's like this old guy, I guess, like replies, he's like, no one is working at the film strip anymore, blah, 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 blah. I'll see more. So he's like pointing out that it like film as people understand it is like something that people will call filmmaking, even though people don't really shoot on film anymore. So I play like the dumbest person on the planet and act like I don't know what a film strip is. And he gets really angry. And then I act like I don't know that they need a camera. I'm like laying out me being an asshole here to like discredit myself to an extent, maybe. But he keeps going on. And kind of the thing that I noticed that when he kept talking about it is people have a really hard time justifying why they shoot digital or why they shoot film. It's just something that you kind of do. Film captures light more beautifully. There's a lot of really funny stuff in here. Anyone DM me, I'll add you to this group. It's really fun. It goes on and on. This other guy replies, I don't know why people thought I was a real person because it's supposed to be like a film club and I act like I don't know like how cameras work. I don't know. It went on for a really long time and this guy like couldn't take a hint of what was going on. Also, I love this guy. I love Tony Vita describing his movie. Tony Vita rocks. A lot of people in this group rock. It feels like a 40s, 50s because it's black and white, but the characters use cell phones and computers. It's 50% sound and 50% silent picture of orchestra music playing over the silent parts. I'm still looking for a sound guide to do the 50% part. Anyway, people have a really hard time justifying when you actually like just straight up ask, why is it that we do like the things we're doing in regards to like filmmaking? Why is film so special? Why do we shoot digitally? What advantage does one have over the other? Blah, 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 blah. Here's another question. Why? Um, I like saw the, I watched the trailer for Justice League recently because I heard the Joker says we live in a society in it. And I was like, oh, I want to see that. But I noticed something really weird. I was watching it and I was like, oh shit, why did Zack Snyder shoot this in Academy? That doesn't make any sense at all. And I like Googled it and he actually shot in like 4:3 because he wanted to use like the full frame of his camera sensor. But I know the original thing was like shot in 16:9. So that's like really weird to think about because you shoot a film with like the frame you're gonna have in mind, but he was completely okay with just like reframing it to see the full frame, even though that's not like how they were probably framing things up. I thought that was like really fucking weird. Um, and then also I saw this thing the other day, interview with an actress whose name I can't say right now. And she was like talking about David Fincher, about how he does like a billion takes. And this like quote kind of stuck with me because it's not like he's like some Stanley Kubrick figure who is just like a psychopath and wants to like tear his actors' brains apart. Um, but it's more actually like he does a billion takes and he can't tell which one's better and he doesn't know what the fuck's going on when he's looking at the picture. But I think that actually says more. She's like, oh, David Fincher's this like OCD crazy person. And like maybe, I don't fucking know. I've never met him, but I think it actually says more. These two things say more about the present of like digital filmmaking than people will give them credit for. In the sense that David Fincher can take like a billion takes and not know what the fuck he's looking at because digital filmmaking is kind of as it is like exists today, is exists as like a kind of crisis where people really don't know what things look like, and when they're kind of like confronted with like a perfect replication of what something looks like by looking at the monitor all the time, it gets really lost of just like, and the fact that you can do like a billion takes over and over again, it can get really lost of what you actually want because you can get like this image of perfection over and over and over, and your idea of perfection kind of gets distorted. And this feeling isn't new with digital, because people, you can like symptomatize this by someone being in the editing bay and saying, I've looked at this so long, I don't know what the fuck I'm looking at anymore. Um, but it wasn't until digital where you could experience this before you even got to editing. And the thing with like Zack Snyder, the interesting thing about it is there's a kernel of truth to it, the way that he's like saying he wants to use the full frame, in that he's able to recognize that digital filmmaking and like the mainstream production process, framing doesn't really matter as much anymore, on the basis that um there's no stakes to what shot you choose anymore. There's no material stakes because you can do as many shots as you want if you're working in like the Hollywood production chain. So it doesn't really matter what shot you kind of go with. There's no material cost to like shooting a different shot. So really it becomes about pure information that you can get in the frame. And that's sort of a problem that people don't want to deal with. Um, Another thing regarding this, here's this here's this a picture I took. Chicago Film Society put out a zine recently, and they're talking about film. And this is also kind of an expression of of the same symptom, in the sense that okay, you just load some film into it, focus the lens, and set an exposure that isn't too high or low. You're almost certain to get an image of some sort of any film you shoot. So this is like a really loosey goosey way of like talking about like shooting film. Just that, and it's also not, this isn't really something someone would say before digital exists. So there's like an idea when you're shooting film of just like, ah, man, it produces perfect images. Oh man, you get great images out of this every time. What's the deal with that? It's like, I can frame it up any way I want. You know what? I'm probably going to get a good image. Um, but this is kind of existing in contrast to like David Fincher's perspective, where he doesn't know what a good image is anymore. Um, that there's now this perspective in film that it's like, yes, it will automatically produce a good image because it has this magic novelty. What's all that about? Um, and the last thing I'm gonna like frame this up with before I kind of get to the main thing is this kind of question. And the question is, I've heard a lot of people say it recently, but I've been wondering it for a bit. And it's like, what does a Netflix show look like? Like, why is it that Netflix shows have a certain look? Um, it's kind of interesting. And part of it, another thing people complain about now is like, oh man, Netflix doesn't have anything compared to when they originally launched. They had all this shit, but that's not really true. They just don't have third party titles as much anymore because they have all this proprietary like content. And the deal with that is Netflix is like a really big company, and when you're a really big company, you want to own just like your entire chain of production. The reason for that is it's going to minimize costs in the long run, because if you're, for example, if you're like Netflix, like you don't have to pay royalties for third party material. It's all in house. But the deal when you do something like that is you're since you own this whole production chain, you're going to want to minimize costs as much as possible, but you also want to keep like a standard. So Netflix has a certain amount of there's certain cinema cameras they allow you to use, and only those ones. And they're like, we'll get to this more later, but what is it like? And also there's kind of this production model that people understand is the cheapest way of doing things, and we know how to do it, and we've done it for a long time, and it works really well, and we're going to keep doing it. So what kind of happens is this dominant aesthetic unconsciously emerges. But it kind of slips under people's radar. Not viewers, though. Oh, yeah, here's this. Some guy from like 2015 on Reddit being like, anyone else thinks Netflix original shows seem to have the same look? This guy beneath has like kind of an answer. He says like it's red cameras, which even in 2015, that wasn't really the case. But you know, like answers will happen on, people will say things on Reddit. You know, it's like midwit zone. People don't know what's going on. He is able to like kind of understand though the Netflix wants this kind of like level of competency in their look, but the real question is like he says like a weird thing like not everything needs to look gritty. I would argue that on if I want to argue in his own terms that red cameras have a very gritty look to them, but the real question is how does this like level of competency get established? What does good start to mean? So this is like what I'm going to introduce here. I'm going to introduce two antinomies like videography and cinematography and digital and film. So these two antinomies are historically bound up and inform one another. Videography is historically conducted with video and it's understood as a job, whereas cinematography is historically conducted with film, but it's understood as an art form. And like ask yourselves at this point, like what does video and film mean now when one says like I'm making a video or I'm making a film or I've been videoing or filming something? Note that these two things have kind of become detached from their original meanings, but there's like a connotation to it. When I was in high school, when I was like I did like video shit in high school and kids there was this dude I know that like made short films and then I made like a short film and then I went out of my way to keep calling it a video because I knew it'd irk him. Which was funny. So here's this crisis, kind of the way it flows. Digital becomes kind of bound up within videography and cinematography between the two, whereas film like pushes deeper into the realm of cinematography and kind of gets lost in that. And where we're interested in is kind of this like site between videography and cinematography where things have become grayed and we don't really know what the fuck's going on. So I'm gonna like just do a quick like rundown in case like this is like sort of lost on people. So like the digital revolution happened between like the 90s to the 2010s. It makes recording materials for shit very cheap and accessible for everyone. Overhead gets cut down tremendously. Digital enters into cinematography like soon after it enters into the world of videography. But this causes the difference between videography and cinematography to become more obscure. Equipment for videography and cinematography became one the same, and the labor pool too, while previously crossed over, became completely fluid between videography and cinematography. So this may at first appear a good thing because you're like, okay, cinematography is this more prestige form, so it's good that people have this upward mobility into it from videography, which you're right. But also the problem is this isn't really directly acknowledged in the sense that there's no conscious people unless you're like in the industry, but you'll still talk about it casually because you're just like a grip guy doing his job. And like, I just do it, I get told, blah, 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 blah. People aren't really consciousness of the blurring between cinematography and videography. So the mode of thought associated to videography gets insidiously like carried into cinematography, as well as these like invisible aesthetics that go along with it. So here's a silly question. What does good mean when people say it? So I would like to remind everyone, if you've seen the movie or if you haven't, I don't care, of like the personal conflict Burt Reynolds has in Boogie Nights. So he's like a porn director in porn's golden age, but he becomes compromised when he's forced to shoot on VHS rather than film. And so this may appear like silly to us because he's just shooting porn. You're like, what? It doesn't matter. But his character's conflict is a legitimate expression of a real concern. And like, why is this? Because the answer just can't be lowered to like the magic of film, because this is kind of a mystification, even though this is how people would justify it. The movement towards video for Burt Reynolds' character kind of marks the movement away from art, or at least artfulness. VHS as a consumer format removes the actual necessity of Reynolds' character because it can be used by anyone. It's no longer a matter of dense technical know-how, which in turn can be applied towards this artistic endeavor. It becomes a job closer to fixing a sink. The obvious aesthetics of VHS make it difficult to work within as a medium in ways that don't just obviously point to the fact that it is indeed something shot on VHS. You don't hear the phrase, this scene is really well shot and lit in regards to something shot on VHS. The aesthetic of VHS leaked into general videography with the development of consumer grade formats, and videography aesthetics carry with them the stigma of unart. And this is perhaps one of the reasons the news package has never been considered as a as a potential site for art creation. There's a danger in an aesthetic revealing itself too obviously, because that aesthetic obviousness can quickly de-aestheticize itself. So the imprint of consumer grade has never really left digital skin at a cultural level. And it's this cultural treatment of digital mediums as a tool, which has resulted in both the non-consideration of digital's artistic potential, as well as unfortunate emergent digital aesthetics, which converge towards homogeneity, and in turn the fetishization of these aesthetics. What could one expect other than homogeneity when there becomes a correct way of doing things? And this is like the look, or better to say like non-look maybe, of every Marvel, Disney live action movie, many made for Netflix shows and movies. What does it mean again, like when Netflix has a list of digital cameras you're allowed to use? And many other major modern studio affairs. So here's a cinematographer, Anthony Dodmantel. He kind of works as a blueprint for this because his career is like a microcosm of this whole shift towards digital correctness. So in his career, you can see the great untapped potential of digital cinema, but also its kind of greatest failures in achieving that potential. So Don Mantell like cut his teeth as a cinematographer. He's shooting multiple Dogma 95 films in mini DV, which is this movement in the 90s where they're trying to like kind of I'm not necessarily agreeing with it, but what they were trying to do is drop a lot of the fluff of filmmaking and just like make these like pure quotation marks films about life. So there's no music. A lot of them shot on mini DV to get like natural performances, so you don't have this full camera crew. There's other stuff I don't remember right now. So he's shooting many like these Dogma 95 films on mini DV. And the interconnection between his practice and his methods of his work, the interconnection between his practice and the methods his work was recorded on can be seen like a peak in Julian Donkey Boy, which is shot on mini DV and then transferred and edited on 16 millimeter and then blown up to 35 millimeter, which gives this movie like a deeply textured and suitable for what the film's about, like schizophrenic look, which alternates between expressionist recreation of reality to distorted and sullen impression of images. Mini DV also occupies this kind of weird place in the sense that it's something that's shot, it's something that is recorded on a physical analog format, but it's actually digital video. So it's kind of in this weird hybrid place. In 2002, he shot 28 Days Later, which is like a mainstream film that sort of carried the torch of digital cinema at the time. And there's like this certain purity one sees when watching it today, because it's this digital that's honest about its materiality as a digital. And it features cinematography, which effectively works within its digitalness. Its forward thinkiness is perfectly in step with that period. By 02, being ahead of the curve meant you were only keeping step with the present. Dot Mantell today represents a far more articulated iteration of the digital hegemony. It can be seen like Dread, 127 Hours, T2 Train Spotting, blah, 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 blah. However, due to simultaneous developments in digital cameras and resolution and color depth, what makes Dod Mantell's filmmaking distinct and genuinely explorative becomes obscured. Because when digital cameras get this good, in quotes, the way they're distinct becomes more and more elusive. The developments made by him and other early adopters of digital cinematography get flattened and extracted by influential cultural nodes like the Disney and Netflix production models. And the vast cultural dissemination of these forms of filmmaking solidifies them as correct. Because if everyone's doing it, that must mean it's right. Netflix shows get shown in film production classes at universities, as you guys probably know, making rigid these aesthetics, which are actually quite flexible. Star Wars soy face stan account saying to you, let people enjoy things. This is the best looking media that exists right now. We're in a golden age of movies. 432 likes, 12 retweets, blah, blah, blah. This is not some accusation of appropriation or even worse, some call to arms to return to some like aesthetic authenticity. And it's also not a request to like return to baby's first Brechtian distanciation where we're just pointing at the production process. Like, look, it's a movie. Look, it's a movie. but rather it's just trying to symptomatize how the highly unstable and flexible forms of digital recording delivery have been forcibly pushed into this mold. And so, like, what is this mold? Or maybe I'm asking how to describe the aesthetic of the contemporary mass media production process illustrated by Disney and Netflix. So, returning to the statement I made earlier, I described cameras as getting quote unquote good as the resolutions get larger and the color depths get deeper. But why is this good? Like, good in terms of what? And how did this become what is generally considered good? When digital video emerged, some potentialities were revealed through the massive cost elimination entailed. So this was like recording, you could record as much as possible. The continuation and perfection of videography hardware as a tool, which includes that of surveillance. So if you're having like surveillance video, you want as much detail as possible so you can see the perp's face when you fucking arrest them. And the eventual replacement of film through digital recording delivery. It was thought that film was going to become irrelevant. Look at this really awesome like screenshot from this magazine from when The Phantom Menace came out, which is one of the first films that got projected on digital. And you can see like the opposite perspective of what's generally thought about like today. This guy will like talk about, it's like, wow, it's like this is the best screening of a movie I've ever seen. It's the picture, it's so sharp, everything's so perfect, this is incredible. um and you can look back at him today and be like, oh, you're a fucking idiot. But this like represents like kind of a real, like, what people really thought digital was going to be. It was going to be like this perfection of like images, but it seems like that hasn't been satisfied today. Um, so all these potentialities of digital were underlined and informed by this very Western tendency of like desiring perfection in media and experience consumption scenarios, and were facilitated in recent years by the reconsolidation of the production chain by Netflix and Disney and other streaming services, which must minimize costs while maintaining this standard of quality, whatever that means. Many of these potentialities had to be realized by production outlets to justify the transition to digital, when, of course, the heart of the need for the justification was the huge cost reduction digital recording delivery provided. All of these potentialities had to be shown to be capital G good in order for consumers to buy into digital recording delivery. This was solidified by the constant advancements in recording delivery tech being pushed onto consumers. Digital television in 2009. Now there's 720p HD. Now there's 1080, 4K. Your computer screen is retina display, whatever the fuck that means. Your phone can now record HD footage. Future shock becomes present numbness, and the way we ended up here ceases to matter. The chain of cultural shifts and decisions made becomes bullshit. Eventually, the consumer and the thoughtless producer decide that, this is what I want, it's what I'm supposed to want, and it's what I've always wanted. To realize the potentials presented by production nodes and the technology manufacturers set to profit off these potentialities, there becomes a certain obsession in the videography and no budget filmmaking crowd to make things cinematic. What exactly does this very vague term mean? Online, you will find all kinds of instructional content about how to make your videos more cinematic. I think I went, whatever. Although many of these, they're actually either basic instructions on how to use a camera, or how to reproduce the aesthetic of content. There are multiple through lines to all these tutorials. Coloring footage or usually just adding a loop, using slow motion. Wow. Shooting 24 frames per second. Wow. For some reason, they all tell you to never use a zoom. Wow. Steady motion by way of a gimbal and warp stabilizer, not acknowledging that gimbals and warp stabilizers have looks of their own, which tends more towards the aesthetic of content. And of course, adding black bars. Rather than aspect ratios, these content creators must say black bars because since 16:9 is so dominant to people working only with aesthetics on the level of making YouTube videos, they can only view other aspect ratios through the ratio of 16:9. But this trend flows in the other direction as well. 16:9 and 1.78:1 wasn't considered an aspect ratio for cinema until the digital cinema package, which is how most movies get shown today. came along to replace film in theaters. So quoting my friend Julian, who heads the Chicago Film Society, whenever I see 1.78 film, like a 1.78 film or a film that switches between aspect ratios or has some goofy made up aspect ratio, it indicates to me that the filmmaker has no concept of how a cinema actually works. For example, most multiplexes, if they have masking at all, only have masking for 1.85 and 2.39. So anything else won't be masked properly. Even worse, if the aspect ratio is 2.0 or some other bullshit, and it's being projected on a scope screen, odds are that it'll have black on both sides because AMC doesn't have a preset for it. But a desire to, also, I want to underline, Julian is like a projectionist, so he's gonna like have the perspective of a projectionist. That's like important just to know. But a desire to make things cinematic is not a new trend. Videographers realized early on their videography looked markedly different from what they'd see in the theater, and they worked from the outside to figure out why in order to get videography to start looking like cinematography. Working from within videography to emulate cinematography, however, only revealed the differences between the two. So, for example, videography has had a good, and it has a good because it's a job. If you're shooting a wedding as like a videographer, your client might start getting a little pissed off if you start taking too many creative liberties with your camera settings or whatever. So this there emerges like a right way of doing things. So here's a question. I've been on this PowerPoint for longer than I've intended to. So now you've probably been able to kind of sit on these two images, which are really funny looking. What are like what's the difference what's the difference between these two people besides one is a man and one is a woman and one is holding a cigarette? I don't know. Anyone can answer. I don't care. Or else I'll answer for you. Okay.
I have an idea. Is one digital and one's manual?
Yeah. How do you feel about these two people that one has like a digital and one has like a film camera?
Um,
What do you think about the like where do you think these people would post these pictures?
oh gosh, I'm not sure. Post like
Yeah, if they're gonna put these online, they get these pictures taken themselves with a camera to be like, oh look, I'm a person with a camera, blah blah blah. Wait, let's say this is pictures of the same person, and let's say it's like you. Where would you put what social media profile would you put the left one, and where would you put the right one? I don't know if
um
you'll get like I don't know what you'll say, but let's see.
I think the one on I kind of like what Aiden said in the chat, but the one on the right is giving me Instagram vibes, but the one on the left is maybe like a Facebook or a LinkedIn. I don't know.
Yes.
People might disagree.
Um. Oh, I didn't even know there was.
The
I
to
didn't even
me
know
the
there was
one
chat. What's
on the
up,
right, it
Aiden?
looks like what's up, Clay? It looks like something someone would post on like Visco or some shit like that. And the left, it looks like it was done more in post than anything.
So there's a stigma when you have a digital camera versus when you have a film camera. So if you have a digital camera in your hands, you're doing a job. Whereas if you have a film camera in your hands, all of a sudden you're doing art. So you might see the left one on like a LinkedIn or Facebook and the right one's on Instagram. A digital camera is a tool and film is a medium. At least this is how most people think. So this assumption feels easy to make because the infinite uses disregarding obsolescence of a digital camera and an SD card gives it the feeling of a tool in your hand. When you're using a digital camera, you're likely doing a job. Weddings are shot on digital cameras and so are corporate events. They're used by people who put photographer in their LinkedIn. But if you're shooting film, all of a sudden you're a capital P photographer, the type of photographer with artistic prestige, photographers who get their works displayed in galleries. Not to say there isn't a crossover between these two types of photographers, or the digital work isn't shown in galleries, or there aren't some weddings shot on film, but it seems to fall along these lines. What does it mean when a camera is viewed as a tool? There are right ways of using a tool, like a hammer. There haven't really been any major artistic development. There haven't been any major developments in how to use a hammer over the past 500 years. Probably not 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years. The hammer hasn't had any major artistic movements associated with it. With how digital cameras are culturally treated, being good at using a digital camera doesn't mean being able to take good photographs on it. It simply means understanding how to use it correctly and to understand all of its functions. Being good at using a digital camera means you've read the instruction manual. This is not meant to like disparage digital photographers or digital photography, but this is kind of how it's treated culturally. What does it mean to say that cinematography has a good? What does that mean? I like looking at what happens when you type in like the lowest common denominator, like searches. I feel like you're putting your finger on like the pulse of the entire world. So I'm sure you might have heard your peers say, or even your professors just throw around that word in regards to cinematography before, good. But what do they actually mean when they say that? So let's take a lateral for a second and let's look at the ARRI Alexa, which isn't just one camera, but really a series of cameras. But I'm going to treat it like it's one camera for a second to simplify things, and then I'll kind of blow it up. So you may know the ARRI Alexa has for a while and still is today been like the standard of like cinema cameras. So I don't know if you can really reproduce this today because there's been so many new cameras that have come onto the market, which are comparable in ability to the Alexa. But you used to be able to do this thing if you like knew what you were doing when you were watching a movie, where you could actually identify Alexa footage in a movie just by looking at it. And this would play out kind of in your head going like, oh, did they shoot this on film? And then you look at it for a couple more seconds, you're like, wait, no, that's not quite right. So what does it mean when the Alexa is the standard? And why is it the standard according to people who work in cinematography? What did I put right here? Oh yeah, I'll get to that in a second. So with the Alexa, you can shoot raw, which is just pure data. It's not video files. So you get a lot of information. You get high color spaces, which again, a lot of information of your color. You can shoot anamorphic if you have a license, because digital cameras also bring DRMs, like DRM to camera, the same way that John Deere brings DRM to tractors. You get high dynamic range, meaning you get a really wide values of dark to light. And you can get like, depending on what Alexa you're choosing, most of them have pretty large sensors, especially the Alexa LF, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. I'm going to focus on these last two for a second. So why is high dynamic range relevant? Why is it relevant that you can get a big breadth of values between light and dark? Obviously, if like a high dynamic range, an image can like retain more information and highlights and shadows, but there's more to it than just that. And this was the thing the digital could not beat film at for a while. When people say good regarding digital cinema, they most often mean good in terms of film, not good on its own terms. I said right here in my notes, in brackets, find quote of someone saying how Alexa makes film irrelevant. I Google searched this a bunch. I promise this has been said to me, but I cannot find an example in the period of time. So if you pay attention, it seems like half the shit shot on Alexa now has film grain filters over it though. Good in terms of film. People argue that with modern film grain filters and cameras like the Alexa, there's no reason to shoot on film anymore because you can reproduce the aesthetic of film just as well, and like average viewers won't be able to tell the difference. But this also views the value of film and digital in a really veneer way, in the sense that the value of it only comes from this like venereal aesthetic. To take this claim seriously isn't just to say that film is irrelevant, it's also to say that digital is a mere replicant of film and thus also irrelevant. This claim is validated in some ways though, because some of the filmmakers calling out to keep film alive today don't represent their own argument very well. So Wonder Woman 1984, whoa, we shot this entire movie on film, and then one less than perfect shot Twitter posting your frame that you worked so hard on the account. Ouch. The Tarantinos, the Nolans, the Sean Bakers of the world, haven't done anything close to as interesting with the materiality of film as even someone like David Fincher when he still shot on film and the cinematographers he worked with in the 90s. That's kind of weird. Let's pull up Sean Baker for a second. Let's go to Letterboxd, the worst site online. So let's look up Sean Baker. Here's a tip. If any of you ever get famous as a filmmaker, do not have a public letterbox. That's like the dumbest idea you can ever do. So if you go to his reviews, you'll notice that there's like this thing that he does where, let me see if I can find it, Control F film. That's pretty stupid to do that on a site about film. Blah, 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 blah. He doesn't do it as much anymore, which is good. Friends with Adam Friedland on Letterboxd, lmao, okay. Okay. The last sequence is shot digitally. Yuck. Blah, blah, blah. You'll find all this shit. And here's another one. I'd love to see a 35 millimeter print struck. Okay. So here he is shitting on his own film because the last part shot digitally. I also don't like the end of this film. Not for that reason, though. Maybe I'll get to that later. Midsummer, he wants a 35 millimeter print struck of a film shot digitally. Why? I went to a screening of Florida Project where Sean Baker was there, which was really funny because the worst people you've ever imagined your entire life went up for a Q&A and would just ask the most annoying questions you can imagine. And I left early because I got so annoyed. But you'll notice when guys like him talk about film, they won't really have a good reason of why they think it's better. It'll just be like, oh, there's something magical when you sit down in the theater and you see a movie on film, which, okay, I can take that claim seriously, but they won't be able to tell you why. They won't be able to give you an actual reason why there is like this different aesthetic experience with film than digital. And they may have these shitty reasons, but I feel like you can disprove most of them. Okay. Why is this? Like, with all this shit, it's partly because why is it that like these people can't justify like the use of film, and why is it that they can't shoot things better on film they did in the 90s? Maybe that's like a romantic take, maybe it's not. It's partly because I think within the saturation of digital, the memory of shooting on film has partly been lost, but it's also not that simple. It's expensive to shoot on film. So you tell whoever's in charge of your money for a project that you want to shoot on film, and you're likely going to receive some raised eyebrows. Because of the cost benefit of shooting on film, when the material is actually used now, risk is minimized to a great degree. There's also a novelty of shooting on film that didn't exist when film was the common means of shooting a film. For this, if you're a person like Tarantino or Nolan, you feel as though you need to uphold film as a cultural object, and that often leads your aesthetics to this empty formalism that's orientated towards the past. Or if you're someone that's shooting film and this isn't the norm for yourself, like you guys, if you might shoot on film, the novelty often dominates you. So if we're going to shoot film, we're going to do it right. This right is typically like manifest into this formalism or like oriented also towards the past. We don't want to waste the role. We're going to do it right. So experimentation is discouraged out of fear of fucking it up. Formalism gets lowered to mean with as little risk and experimentation as possible, unless when that experimentation gets formalized into a schema, draining it of any spontaneity. If you've seen that spontaneity and that spontaneity, if you see that clip of like David Lynch like screaming and chain smoking cigarettes, like it's like, oh, I could have had 5 whole fucking days to like shoot this place. I wanted to play around. It's partly what he's talking about, but he's talking about it in terms of a production process. So if you mix these factors emerging from cost and novelty with a severe reduction in available film stocks, and you'll see a homogenization in the look of film shot on film, characterized by the Kodak demo reel. What does the Kodak demo reel look like? It looks like we need to show all the things our film can do. So we're going to shoot it in the most basic way possible that doesn't accentuate its style. So you guys know what you can do with it. But now imagine if everything is shot like this. music video look really poppin'. We're gonna have this guy wrap the hands, and we're gonna show everyone to know we're not racist anymore for films. um, bring it back to earlier. Since film feels novel and is put on this pedestal, it sometimes suffers from the opposite symptom that just set the camera down and shoot pretty much the right exposure and it'll look good. So this is kind of like the opposite, as like this weird empty formalism that's kind of emerged in like the film shooting world as like digital has emerged. But if we go back to the Alexa for a second, let's consider the large sensor with this thing, especially the Alexa LF, which stands for large format. Haha. What's the benefit of a large sensor? So a large sensor can produce more detailed images, it can perform better in lower light, it can typically pick up more information in general. Indeed, this is how larger sensor cameras were advertised when they were introduced to the market by camera and imaging companies. They can produce these incredibly detailed images, especially when paired with super sharp modern lenses of today. In this particular respect, digital outpaces film, except against 70 millimeter sometimes. Note Tarantino retreating to 70 millimeter following the development of large format digital cinema cameras. First of Hateful Eight. Perhaps this reflects an anemic understanding of film, maybe, that while many of those who use digital only use it in terms of film, Tarantino can only use his film in terms of digital. However, the creation of extremely detailed images is not how these sensors are typically used. And I'm going to blow that up for a moment. Large sensors are not only capable of yielding a lot of detail, but also extremely shallow depths of focus. And you'll find this if you watch a lot of contemporary digital work, that a lot of it shoots wide open with extremely shallow depths of focus, or at least like with extremely shallow depths of focus, despite the huge advantages of shooting otherwise with the particularities of large sensors. And it might be said, it's an artistic decision. I don't want everything to be completely sharp, which is fair. But then the question could be raised, why do you need to shoot on an Alexa? That they might answer, they might try to justify that question without falling back on, and many will not be able to justify that question without just falling back on, well, it's the best camera. There is a real justification for large format digital cameras. For example, with something like the Alexa LF, lenses appear wider than on like a standard sensor size without actually increasing the depth of field. Very hilariously, this is one of the reasons the Alexa LF was used on the Joker. People also justify it by saying you can create these emotional worlds of shallower depths of field these cameras can shoot. This I'd buy less, though I understand wanting to get shallower focus of wider lenses, though it has created this new development on an old trend that gets lost on most people. And already this new old trend is getting picked up and abused for the same reasons it got abused originally. And there's also this historically this promise with digital cameras that they would provide more detail, but this promise in many ways seems to have become lost. And also, you guys likely won't be able to shoot on large format cameras as students. They're very expensive to rent. But you know, let me just show you something. Alexa, large format. I was like Googling shit today and I found this one. Here we go. How large format cameras are changing film language. Changing film language. Interesting. This is something that's kind of been used since the digital revolution, because the digital revolution, what it really asks when like digital cameras began to dominate everything, and this also like regards like digital information technology in general, it really asks you, was that really a revolution? Because if you view it from the outside, nothing has really changed. The transition from analog to digital actually views like, if you do some research, it kind of just reads like a regressed repetition of the transition from portrait and landscape painting to like photography. If you want to like source me on that, read Walter Benjamin's Short History of Photography. Changing film language of a large format camera, and the only way they can justify that is with, oh, we can now like shoot wider without increasing the depth of field. I don't know if I buy that. You can also say it's like a publication, so they have to exaggerate because journalists always exaggerate. I don't know the oh yeah, was a large format cinema camera. Let me see if I can actually find this. There's this thing this guy said. I felt like I got like a little bit of brain damage. Maybe I won't be able to find it. Anyway, maybe I'll find it later. But why do people shoot wide open? So I'll give you like with their lenses. I'll give you two answers. One's easy and one's hard. So the easy one is it's cheap and fast and easy. If you shoot with your lens wide open, it means you don't need to light a scene as much, helped also by the large sensor, which are better suited for lower light situations. It also means you don't really have to do prod design if you don't want to, because people can't see the background. So this method has this tendency to promote laziness, but it also carries this look with it. Let me give you the hard answer to this question though, because it complicates it. Videography in the 90s and the early 2000s had a problem, and that problem was it looked like videography. The footage people shot didn't look like what they saw in theaters, and it wasn't just that they weren't shooting on film. Videographers wanted to change this, but that wasn't going to be easy, especially during their time period. Video cameras, especially at this period, but also still today, while cheaper, have different functions than cinema cameras because they have different intended uses. In order to fit the videographic desire to emulate cinematography, there's been a long tradition of tools to mod video cameras to be more cinematic, and these mods reveal the shape of videographers' ideas of what exactly this meant. So an early example of our lens adapters for the Canon GL2, which was a professional mini DV camcorder from 2003, which is popular among a pretty wide user base, particularly skaters. These lens adapters can be used to stretch the camera's native 4:3 aspect ratio to 16:9 when used in combination with editing software, or could change the appearance of the camera's focal length to give it a blurred background. Blurring the background like a long lens was something that was really important to 2000s videographers attempting to make their footage look cinematic or filmic, because it was notably something that video cameras couldn't really do. This is from a combination of the fact they were typically equipped with wider lenses and the small sensor size prohibited blurred backgrounds, so the larger the sensor, the shallower the depth of field can be. There's a really mixed pool of people who work in videography and cinematography, and this trend in videography began to manifest itself as a trend in indie filmmaking. As digital filmmaking became more popular throughout the digital revolution, it became cheaper and cheaper to make an indie film. The combination of lights still being expensive and the notion that blurred background equals cinematic caused the aesthetic tendency of many indie films to be shot with extremely shallow depths of field. But this had unintended consequences of its own. With the background blurred, filmmakers were able to skimp on set and prod design, causing many indie films and TV, for example, watch a bunch of like old IFC miniseries from like the 2000s and the early 2010s. They seem to take place in these barren worlds where their characters just like float around in. So shooting a low depth of field requires the camera's lens to have an open aperture, which not only increases how much light the image receives, but it also decreases the contrast of the image. So when this is combined with cinema cameras that shoot in RAW or really neutral log files, combined with low budgets or lack of know-how that cause filmmakers to skimp on color correction, this also caused many of these films to appear very, very gray or washed out. Blacks and whites became milky gray, and this unintentional aesthetic was exacerbated even further when professional videography cameras gained the capability of shooting log footage. And with the quick turnaround times and low budgets of the videography world, this aesthetic became a natural inevitability. Take it from me, who has worked in videography, more than half of the time, people do not give a shit if you give them uncolored footage. It's even likely the aesthetic's prevalence influenced the Instagram aesthetic of the mid 2010s, with users dropping the blacks of their image into a milky look. Because at this point, the public's idea of that aesthetic's emergence had regressed simply to the look of vintage due to its moderate similarities of faded film. And this made a lot of sense to people in the late 2000s and early 2010s because phone cameras were still bad, but dumping a bunch of Instagram filters onto an image hid this. go to the bottom of someone's older Instagram account and notice when they stop using IG's built-in filters. This then also gets reproduced in Adobe Premiere's coloring interface, which offers a faded film bar that when you increase it, grays the blacks. This is a simplification of what happens when film fades and is really a replication of this Instagram look. Um, blah, 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 blah. This aesthetic trend can be seen turned on its head in Hugh Bowes' An Elephant Sitting Still, which rocks. You guys should watch it. A film made up of barely colored footage, and some I don't think they colored at all, which is a main factor of the really depressive atmosphere the whole film has. So an awareness of these incidental emergent aesthetics of the past can inform conscious decisions in the present. So back to cinematic as a category, what videographers were trying to pursue by modding their cameras, this tendency gets inherited in the early and mid 2010s by film bros. So film bro is a really old term, but there's this very specific thing people mean when they say it in the context of the 2010s, because it's so married to like the particular cultural context of that time. So one of the things that happened in the 2010s was called the DSLR revolution. And I'm assuming many of you know what this is, but also I don't know at all, because I don't know what the cultural memory is for people who are like 5 years younger than me. And I feel like this stuff gets like memory hold really fucking quickly. So if this is like unfamiliar, the DSLR revolution was like these DSLR cameras, like digital single lens reflex, like what most digital cameras are, aside from like mirrorless cameras, started getting released, and they could shoot HD video. So most of these cameras were Canon, like most notably the 5D. Like Francis Ha was shot on a Canon 5D, and then like Noah Blaumbach was like, yes, the 5D when changed to black and white looks like 16 millimeter. Like, okay, whatever. This was considered a revolution for a couple of reasons. And one, it made the entry to make like a cinematic professional film, like cinematic and professional looking film, way easier, like way lower buy-in, way lower overhead, since these cameras were priced for consumers. And two, these cameras are really, really small and light. You can literally toss them around. When I was in high school, they had like these shitty Canon T2Is that the videography class had. And like, I remember one time to do a shot, we literally like threw the camera up in the air and like spun it. It was really funny. They're really fucking light. So you can literally toss them around. This also means you don't need crazy camera support equipment, and this applies to stabilization as well. So now, do you know what film bros also like talking about in the 2010s? They like talking about, well, this is a bunch of instructions about how to make your video more cinematic. Very funny. You know what film bros also like long takes. They like talking to people about long takes. So long takes have a lot of movement and shit going on. DSLRs and gimbals sold with DSLRs in mind, facilitating long takes, which due to the digital revolution overtaking professional cinematography at the time, were in vogue in Hollywood as well. So somehow, I don't know why, but the long take you'd always get shown was the one from Goodfellas. But alongside that was the stuff that Emmanuel Lubezki shot in the 2010s. And Emmanuel Lubezki is important. His style is dominated by these like super long takes or shots that are made to look like long takes of hidden cuts. So like talking about like Revenant, Birdman, Gravity, Children of Men, etc. So here's what people are not asking in the 2010s and like the early 2010s. What's the difference between the Goodfellas meme long take and any long and like the whole of Emmanuel Lubezki's whole like OVR? And the difference is Goodfellas was shot on film and Lubezki shoots on digital. And you're like, why does this matter? Why is a long take with a bunch of movement and shit impressive? And the answer is virtuosity. So if we're going to look at cinematography, where does this virtuosity actually get its value from? Like, why is it valuable that someone's really virtuosic with a camera? And if you want to look at the Goodfellas meme shot, it comes from the risk. So shooting on film means every time someone fucks up, you just lost a bunch of money. There's stakes to this skill because if the skill was lacking, it could put the whole production in danger from losing too much money. what does it mean? What does this mean in regards to digital? So without this, virtuosity becomes flexing. The stakes decrease to such a large degree with digital that the only risk with most long takes shot digitally becomes the risk of wasting time. And although time is money, the risk is really just not the same. The NBA play of the week gets replayed by a hustler at LA Fitness against a middle schooler. Um, and when you can do as many do-overs as you want, the flexing becomes less and less impressive. My paper rip. People begin to take notice that while a lot may be happening in a long take, not a lot may be happening for a reason. And if every shot can be a long take, how hard can it be? I mean, it may actually be hard, but the audience is going to ask if everything is a long take, can't be that fucking hard. I don't think it's an accident that so many of these 2010s prestige films have already been memory holed. A lot of them are pretty vacuous, in my opinion. And the cinematography definitely has something to do with it. The camera is often doing a lot of looking, but not a lot of seeing. So let's look at someone else who does long takes digitally, but with like a lot less movement. Also, I want to show you guys this. This is crazy. I saw this today. Shut up with these fucking ads. Giant screens are about to get sharper. This is like this got like video got released 5 months ago with this fucking crazy ass large format cameras. This is what you can do with a large format camera. So start off here, 900% magnified, and go to here. It's crazy what you can do with that shit, but people don't want to do it for that. There's a disparity between what filmmakers want and what technology companies want. Filmmakers will be like, we're always pushing back against digital, trying to make it look more romantic and stuff. But the people saying this are working like Hollywood. It's like, people say film is more expensive, and it is on material level, shot per shot. But once you get to editing, that starts to get a little bit negligible. And if you're working in Hollywood, you can shoot on film. Why do you need to break a digital camera to get the look you want? So I'm going to show you this clip I'm just going to keep this playing in the background. This is from Stray Dogs. Apologies. I wish it was a bit more HD, but also it's streaming over Zoom, because this is really best enjoyed when you can see just how like completely sharp this is. This is shot digitally. Stray Dogs is from 2015, I think, or maybe 2018, by Simon Lang. So Stray Dogs is shot digitally. So what does a shot like this mean on a digital camera? So unlike a really virtuosic long take, it'd be difficult to mess this shot up. I mean, you might not get the performance you like, but you can do it again. You can always like do it again. They're not doing like a lot of emoting. So I wouldn't be surprised if this just didn't take like a crazy amount of takes to do. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is how long this fucking shot is. This clip is 20 minutes. It's 2 shots. So all of Stray Dogs is pretty much like this. Shots go on, and sometimes for a lot longer than you'd like them to. And I'm not going to advocate slow cinema, because I think that's a really reified concept. When I say reified, I mean like thingified. It's just become a thing. People say, "Oh, I shoot slow cinema." Northwestern University, blah 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 blah. Bye, Alex. Anyway, I'm not gonna like advocate slow cinema, because I think it's a really reified concept, and the different strands which have motivated its coming to being have become lost. But Simon Lang is good. And you realize how good this is when you've seen his older work, which is shot on film, because it's different in a really specific way. He's always done these really long lingering shots, but it wasn't until he started shooting digitally that he started doing it to this extreme. And part of the reason for this is, as you can imagine, is that the cost incentive of cutting down shot length disappears when you shoot digitally, but that's also not just it. Film and digital have different relationships to time, and I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that one of the things digital did was separate the object, which records and stores the image, into two, while on film, this was like a single thing, the film itself. For digital, it becomes the sensor that records and the card that stores. And there's also the matter of accumulation of physical media versus the non-accumulation of digital media. 11 minutes of shooting on Super 16 translates to 400 feet of film, which in turn is about 150 to 250 per roll, and even more for development and even more for digital scanning. If you see a lingering shot in a movie shot on film, there's a sense the movie means it. That's money spent. But you also feel its impermanence. You know that eventually the film is going to run out. After all, a reel can only be so long. And this is why Andy Warhol's Empire is crazy, but people think it's just like a meme today because it was crazy to show an 11-hour film back then. You're like, how's this shit not run out? And without changeover cues too. The way that physical media accumulates gives an emphasized sense of temporality. If you know what you're doing, you can look at a roll of film and know about how many minutes it's worth. A certain length of film will always be the same amount of time, so long it's consistently shown at 24 frames per second. When watching a movie on film, the ending of a reel can even be sensed given changeover cues and the appearance of more noticeable dust and scratches, which often forms on the heads and tails of film due to a combination of static and exposure. The connection between the material and temporality is completely explicit. Longer pieces of media then receive a sense of heft. More reels are required to play a longer film. And for the projectionist, showing a longer film becomes heroic, requiring many changeovers, which are so many opportunities for something to go wrong. In the days, oh my throat. In the days when movies were still shown on film in multiplexes, or with platter projection in general, a longer film increases the risk of tail wrap, which can occur when the platter deck isn't spinning at quite the correct speed. So Prince of Titanic were famous for having the end credits just like completely chewed up. For the filmmakers, shooting a longer movie on film also becomes daunting. Reels and reels of film accumulating and money dissipating. The film must be kept track of through labeling and storage, a process which can be remarkably intense given the amount of footage some movies will shoot, such as Apocalypse Now, which somewhat famously shot 242 hours worth of footage, thousands and thousands of feet of film. And of course, there's always the risk of ruining a reel. With multiple reels of films being shot, the ruining one seems all the more terrifying given the opaqueness of what's on an undeveloped reel. You may have written it down, but there's something really eerie about not being able to just see what you have, like with cleanly categorized clips of a media card. And when you play a roll of film projector over and over, it's slowly deteriorating. So every play causes a little bit of damage. The experience of watching a reel that's received numerous plays brings you in close contact with the material process in which the content of the reel is delivered to you. You become aware of the scratches, the dust, stains, missed frames, splices, and fading a print has. It's an experience that puts you in close contact with the production process. When you take notice of it, you're not just aware of the movie that you're watching, you're aware of the roll of film itself, the projection is playing it, how that film had to, where'd I go? Had to be manufactured, shot, developed, and printed onto the roll you're watching. The process becomes less opaque. When you begin to learn the language of a particular marks of damage, you uncover things about a roll's history. Oh, there was probably a splice between these two scenes. This probably used to be a TV print. Someone watching this in the past must have saw a commercial between those two scenes. The physicality of analog media means changes to that physicality after its production process leads to manifestations in how what's contained on this medium appears to us. Also consider vinyl scratching and popping, VHS tape tracking problems, etc. Film draws attention to itself in more subtle ways that could be consciously picked up by those in the material know and unconsciously felt by those who aren't. Each film emulsion has characteristics which are a result of that particular emulsion's chemistry and the way these chemicals are microscopically layered onto one another. So furthermore, negative film has this very wide dynamic range, meaning that there's a very wide breadth of values which can be shown in an image. So in opposition, positive reversal film has this very narrow dynamic range, meaning the photos are really high contrast and only shows specific values of light and dark. Some film have more noticeable grain than others. Films also deteriorate from time and heat, but different emulsions deteriorate at different rates and in different ways. For example, old heat-worn AGFA prints often look really magenta because the color layers deteriorate in order. And on AGFA stocks, the magenta layer is the lowest towards the base layer. And on Police Story 2, like the Jackie Chan movie, it shows this flashback to the first installment, and the flashback has this magenta tint to indicate that it's like that's a flashback. So emulation of material characteristics are revealing that it's something from the past. Materiality reveals this history. So factors like this make up the soul of a film emulsion. Knowledge like this has only recently become somewhat esoteric. So like when that flashback from Police Story 2 was shown in theaters, people likely understood the interconnection between the flashback and the material representing it. But now if you want to show a flashback, you throw in an intense loot, like lookup table, which is a colored look to uncolored digital footage without actual reason because it's how we've always done it. But what about stray dogs? Like, what about digital we're watching right now? Digital media, on the other hand, is characterized by non-accumulation. There's a mysticism to digital media storage. Obviously, you can't just look at a hard drive and know what's on it. It's like a hard drive. It's a piece of plastic. But it's also impossible to look at a file size or the data of a video file and know what's in the file, or specifically how long the file is only by the size. If you're not Neo, you can't look at the data and just like see things. Even if you had a full understanding of how like a video codec and a video file type associated with it worked, you wouldn't be able to look at a file size and figure out the length of the file. So even Adobe Premiere can only predict the size of a video export, but it can't give you exact figures. The reason for this is video compression results in an inconsistency in how much data is generated per frame. So video with less movement requires less data. For some file types, darker tones take up less data. Some colors take up less data. For example, with the Apple ProRes 422 codec for MOV files, the 422 represents how much data each color of the RGB color model receives in terms of bit depth. So green, represented by the 4, receives double the data of blue and red. And this is because due to some evolutionary traits, humans can see more tones of green than other colors because they want to see predators in like grass. So people can also detect when people are skimping on greens of like video. So you want to show more like green in the video. But this also means that when you're recording something, the ProRes 422 format with a lot of blue and red, it would take up less data than a recording of the same duration of a lot of green. So a shot done digitally has this like opaque mystery to it, which film lacks, which you can see by watching this, because you don't know when this shot is going to fucking end. It cannot be known for how long a long shot will go on digitally. The material restraints of film aren't present with digital recording. There's no marks on digital skin which reveal the passing of time. The long shots in Stray Dogs are daunting and unrelentless. But there's also a threat to the filmmaker that we kind of covered earlier that's always looming when taking a long shot on digital. The question of, does it matter, can present itself with much more ease to an audience or a filmmaker with regards to long shots done digitally because of the lack of overhead associated with each individual shot. With Stray Dogs, unlike Lubeski, the viewer isn't dictatorially caught up in the movement or action of a scene. They're free to let their eyes wander or to completely just phase out. Consideration of the image can quickly invert to self-reflection as the eyes curdle over to stop seeing and start looking. You can get fixated on just random bullshit if you stare on this for long enough. You can just stare at a corner for like a really long time. It's really odd. It's a really weird experience when you see something like this in theaters. Because you start asking like, what am I looking at? In a way that you can't really if you're like seeing a Manuel Lubezki film, which is telling you, look at this right now. As said earlier, looking at an image on film for a period of time can draw the viewer's attention to the filmic material itself, but the same can be said for digital filmmaking through the period of time though the period of time required by the image is often longer, as contemporary viewers are more adjusted to the look of digital cinematography. The last images of Stray Dogs, which are the ones you're looking at right now, and many other takes throughout the film, are particularly effective in drawing the viewer's attention to the recording delivery process of digital media. The texturally rich images prevalent throughout the film draw the engaged viewer's eyes to examine them, and examining them long enough causes a question to arise. What if this texture is recorded image, and what if it is the surface of the image? Like, what is sand and what is digital noise? What is input? What is output? Or is all of the texture of the is all the texture, the content of the image itself. When this question occurs, part of the recording process gets opened up to the viewer, if only a little bit. It reveals that there is a recorded image and a surface of that image, which is created by the recording delivery process. The way this question presents itself with digital was not possible on film. What was I talking about? It was not possible on film because the texture of film grain often dominates the texture of the content of the image, but digital is capable of drawing attention to the pure texture or lack thereof of things it records, though it can have its own material texture as well. So like one should note the things Simon Lang often records in Stray Dogs. So like textured concrete, gravel, skin, tree branches, sand, cracks, fabric, particles like rain, but also things notable for their clarity and smoothness like glass, water, supermarkets, neon, plastic, wood. Digital provides a way of seeing for these objects that was previously partly dominated by the texture of film. Digital noise can also do a similar thing that film grain does, but albeit in a way that manifests itself differently. I'll talk about that in a second. I don't know if you guys, I'm gonna like zoom out of this for a second, if it'll let me. There we go. I don't know if you guys know meme song Disintegration Loops. So Disintegration Loops, you like listen to it. It's just like an hour of the same like loop going over and over again. I don't know if you guys can hear that. But over time, since it's on tape, it slowly just begins to like deteriorate. The tape gets torn apart. I'll compare this with this. So this is like a comparable length. This song Stalker, similar like length loop, but it doesn't deteriorate. It's just the same thing for an hour. And there's something about the way that's like given to you that there's just a whole different meaning generated by the fact that one is the same over an hour and one deteriorates. Oh, I'm not sharing my sound. I don't know if I can. Let's see. It's in the options when you first, oh, okay. Damn, I feel like a millennial. New share. Oh, here we go. Share computer sound. Yeah. Share. Anyway. Yeah, I don't know why, but it's not going to share the audio of that. So you'll just have to take my word for it. Can you guys hear me, by the way? So anyway. Sorry about that. So there's something different about showing, there's something that kind of changes the entire content of something if it's deteriorating over a period of time or not. There's something just like specifically different about digital and analog mediums over a period of time that changes. If there's a desire for a change in the cultural perception of digital recording delivery, moving the goalposts might be required, but not closer, like farther. To do this, first it would probably need to be established that digital media is not a lesser iteration of physical media, rather it's something suitable for different work, or perhaps better to say different considerations need to be made altogether when one shoots on digital. The ideas regarding filmmaking, emphasis on the film can't be transposed onto them, often literally with film grain filters. To do this, there would perhaps need to be a greater cultural understanding that digital doesn't equal immaterial. Rather, it would perhaps need to represent a hyper-elusive materiality. Maybe a good way of explaining this to others would be overlaying the comparison of sculpting and painting onto analog and digital media. When one sculpts, um, yes, yes, exactly. Um, when one sculpts, there's a piece of material to whittle down to give shape to an image. And this reductive process is the same for physical recording delivery mechanisms. Film has a layer of reactive chemicals that are eaten away when exposed to light, forming an image. Painting, on the other hand, is an additive process. One begins with nothing, and then you add more and more material to a surface to create an image. Digital recording delivery begins with nothing, and an image is created by changing zeros to ones. Film once exposed loses weight from the chemicals burning off. Digital actually gains weight via electrons accumulating in storage cards. This is also where the distinction between film grain and digital noise emerges, as film grain is a product of this reductive process on its chemicals, and noise is a result of this additive process. For this reason, noise and grain appear in different tones and move and shimmer in different ways. And this might sound like useless mystique, but it is in actuality what happens, and using digital and physical media, like recording delivery mechanisms in this way, puts one in a closer relationship with the seemingly opaque tech which is used to manufacture media. This is at least like me trying to like de-alienate people who are like working in media from their own practice. What I mean by that is that a lot of people I know who shoot shit, I've heard them say stuff like, I don't know what this thing is doing in regards to the camera. It just makes pictures, or it's basically just like a computer, which is true. But people like don't know how computers really work for the most part. At least people who work in film like don't know how computers work. You don't get this sensation shooting on film a lot of the time. Like, you know how the image is being created. Like, it's definitely held by the fact there's like a lot of like mechanical aspects to film cameras, so you can like feel the film like moving around in the camera, so you know what's going on. You can't say this a lot of time for digital cameras. So this is like meant to put people in closer contact with the way images are being created with a digital camera, so you can take advantage of the camera rather than it taking advantage of you. So viewing digital as like this immaterial materiality may also not actually be the best model to use. But to pull it out for a second, I know it's better than how digital is treated now, which is nothing. And this has produced all these unconscious side effects that it can't possibly be the best way of doing things. Um, if there is not at least some model for what digital cinema is, it will always fall back on videography for what it is, which means digital cinema gets lowered to a job and not an art. Um, Culturally, digital cameras are often viewed anonymously. So a Canon is practically the same as a Red, which is practically the same as an Ari, which is the same as a Panasonic. But this is like bullshit. So people working, like really working within digital cinema, understand the specificity that each digital camera sensor creates. And although this is a specificity like much different than a film emulsion has tendencies which are baked in, and although color timing is required, it isn't typically color corrected. So the top tier digital cameras, however, shoot raw footage, which is meant to be corrected, meaning traits specific between cameras are trickier to identify. So while film emulsions have hard characteristics, digital sensors have soft potentialities. Cinematographic knowledge of shooting on film can't be directly transformed onto digital cinematography. It just can't. If I hear another fucking comment like the cinematography in Avengers Endgame was like inspired by like Antonini's movies, I'm gonna get brain damage. The Russo brothers said this. I would like, if I got like any ounce of fame, I would like spin kick one of them like in public and then lose all of that. It'd be awesome. Um, there's hope though. Like, here's a quote from like Maddie Diop regarding her film Atlantics. So she says, like, dynamics of the red epic and daylight give this dreamy quality to the image captured in a sometimes documentary style, and sublimates the locations drenched in sunlight and situations that are often very contrasted. We really like the subtle rendering of the sandy heat that characterizes Dakar. At nighttime, the high sensitivity of the Vericam 35 allowed us to film light and free in areas of Dakar that are practically entirely plunged in darkness. We often called them clairvoyant nights. Atlantics is a film of ghosts, and the Vericam 35, whose texture we also liked, provided us with a particular acuity and possibility of making a land in faces that are seldom film visible. this camera seemed made for this film. So if I'll be honest, I don't know if this is enough though. I watch movies that cinematography magazines will like jerk off, and I still a lot of times will just feel unsatisfied. Potentials still don't feel realized. Although I think part of this points to it, like with people like having this more advanced perspective towards like the camera they're using, while still understanding the camera isn't enough. It's just something you have to do. So to sum it up really simply, what I've been trying to say this whole time is kind of that the digital revolution moved in such a way that there was some missed opportunities, and this unexamined history of videography and the way modern productions work has kind of unwittingly moved us into this aesthetic place, and now it's just difficult to get out of it. So I hope you view this really as just kind of a launch pad for your own examination of what digital is, and not just like uh, revert to like some aesthetic regression, but to make it interesting work on its but like for you guys to make interesting work on your own terms. Maybe it's only relevant to people working on really small productions to like think this way, like you guys. And maybe it's more of a critique of the way digital cinematech is developed, which we can't really affect. But I don't really know. If you guys want to take one thing away from this, just don't use like film grain filters. It's stupid. Also, I want to earmark one more thing. Is that this doesn't directly address, but it kind of points towards utilizing older cameras to achieve specific aims. Although this seems to be pointing toward, yeah, like utilizing like older digital cameras to do like specific aesthetic things. And this is mostly just something I've been like grappling with because it feels like a slippery slope into like gimmicks. Although a return to older like digital cameras to like reclaim missed aesthetic opportunities is definitely like an avenue. I don't know. I just hope that like its motivation just isn't pure nostalgia. Yeah. That's my thing. And I think the shot is over, so I timed it like exactly right. That's hilarious. I don't know. Alex asked a question. You guys feel free to like unmute. Wow. Anyway. What did Alex even say?